distinguished guests, it is now time for the keynote address on how India will define the new global order, to be delivered by Hon'ble Union Minister Shri Jayant Sinha.
Honorable Chief Minister of Assam, Shri Harmanand Khonowalji, Honorable Finance Minister of Assam, Dr. Himanta Biswa Harmaji, Chief Secretary, DG of Police, Additional Chief Secretary of Assam, President of the Sarat Mahanta Foundation, Mrs. Mahanta, Trustees and Vice Chancellor of the Royal Global University, esteemed dignitaries, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening to all of you. I'm very honored that you've chosen me to give the 4th Professor Sarat Mahanta Memorial Lecture. The 3 previous memorial lectures were given by eminent public intellectuals, and I'm humbled to be in their distinguished company. Before joining public life, I was a professional investor and spent my time looking for good businesses to invest in. So my intellectual credentials compared to those very eminent public intellectuals who've written many books are quite suspect. And thus, it is indeed a special privilege to be with all of you on this, your 4th memorial lecture. Yet it is essential, I believe, that during these uncertain times, for all of us to reflect on the core themes that engage Professor Mahanta. Humanistic principles, the pursuit of truth and social justice appear to be under siege around the world, as we saw in the US and French elections, the Brexit vote, the rise of extremist parties in Europe and America and in Russia, and in the depredations of global terrorism, of which we too are a victim. It is also fitting that we gather today to discuss these themes here in fast-growing Guwahati, the hub of the Northeast and the gateway to East Asia. Guwahati itself is the amalgam of diverse communities, a wide open flow of ideas, and has a very cosmopolitan mindset, which is why a discussion of these humanistic principles and how India might influence the new world order on the basis of these principles is so appropriate. It is India's turn now, ladies and gentlemen, I believe, to be the flag bearer, the vanguard of a new global order. We are at a profound moment in India's history, a time more poignant with possibilities than any other time in the last 3 decades. It is a time when we have a single party majority in the Lok Sabha with a mandate from the people to build a new India, and yes, a new Assam as well. It is a time when we have a decisive and visionary Prime Minister who is determined to forge a bright future for India and all Indians. It is a time when the world is looking to India, to India's leaders, to India's young and talented workforce, to all of us to provide leadership for the next chapter of global growth. It is India's turn now. How do we provide this global leadership? How do we become a Vishwaguru? What do we do to drive sustainable growth in India and around the world? To answer these questions, ladies and gentlemen, I will touch on 3 themes. First, I will describe how India's economic development is inherently frugal and sustainable. Second, I will show that it is India's great for-profit and non-profit innovators and entrepreneurs that are actually driving our frugal development. And finally, I will explain how our government, under the extraordinary leadership of the Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji, has developed a new pro-poor, pro-market role for the Indian state, thereby helping forge a new future for India and for the world. In a slowing global economy, India is ready to seize the baton and become a key contributor to global growth. In the next decade, India is likely to contribute almost as much as China and more than twice as much as the US in terms of absolute economic growth. Moreover, India's economic development model is frugal in the use of natural resources, carbon, and capital. The products and services developed in India for Indians are likely to be used widely across the developing world where the majority of humanity resides. Thus, the Indian frugal development model is going to contribute to global growth not only in quantitative terms, but also in defining a more sustainable growth trajectory for the developing world. Let's look at the numbers, ladies and gentlemen. On a purchasing power parity basis, which is the best measure of economic output, and based on the IMF forecast for 2017, the world's three largest economies are China at $23.2 trillion, the US at $19.4 trillion, and India at $9.5 trillion. But our growth rates are very different. If for the next decade, the Chinese economy grows at an average annual growth rate of 5%, it will contribute an additional $14.5 trillion to global GDP. If the Indian economy grows at an average annual growth rate of 8%, then it will contribute $11 trillion. China was 14, India is going to be $11 trillion. And at an average annual growth rate of 2.5%, which is quite generous for the United States, the US economy will add only 5.4 trillion to the global economy. So if China is adding 14.5 trillion, we are adding 11 trillion, the US is only going to be adding 5 trillion. So our contribution in quantitative terms to global economic growth is twice that of the US and almost equal to that of China. That's how much in quantitative terms we are going to be contributing. And I'm saying this in terms of purchasing power parity, which is a much better measure of economic output. So we are going to be a massive driver of global economic growth. But ladies and gentlemen, the numbers tell only one part of the story. More importantly, India's growth in economic output is qualitatively different from the manufacturing and investment-driven development model followed by East Asian countries. It appears that our model will require much less energy, natural resources, carbon emissions, and capital per unit of GDP. It is thus showing the way towards a frugal and sustainable growth model. Given the historic climate change treaty just signed in Paris, nothing could be more important for the planet. And here in Assam, where you're dealing with the impact of global warming, you're dealing with floods, this is of great significance and importance to all of you. Now let's note that India conserves resources and uses them carefully, ladies and gentlemen, because we have no choice. We are only 2.5% of the world's landmass, 4% of the fresh water. I know there's a lot of fresh water in the Brahmaputra, but trust me, I'm from Jharkhand, where every monsoon we are worrying about water. So we have 2.5% of the world's landmass, 4% of the fresh water, yet we have 17% of the world's population and 17% of the world's cattle as well. So we have a real shortage of natural resources as a result. Our land is needed for agriculture. It tends to be expensive, and real estate prices in India are really high. We impose high carbon taxes, and most of our resource inputs are fairly priced. Manufacturing-driven economies like China, on the other hand, are much more resource intensive. Based on data from the World Bank and the Resources for the Future, China utilizes 52% more energy per unit of PPP GDP than India. 52%. They use a lot more energy. Moreover, the data also suggests that China uses 3 to 4 times more steel and cement than India for each unit of PPP GDP. And importantly, China's carbon emissions per unit of PPP GDP are 78% higher than that of India. India's capital productivity, and as somebody who's a financier, I look very closely at these numbers. India's capital productivity is also much higher than that of other major economies. India has pretty high real interest rates. Capital is priced so that when savers put their money in their bank account, they get good real interest rates. And while some Indian business groups are over leveraged, by and large our companies are quite conservative in their borrowings. Government and financial sector debt in India is also lower than that of other emerging market countries. Therefore, India's debt to GDP, the total stock of debt that we have, which is private debt as well as public debt, and I know Dr. Sharma is following this very closely because like me, he is also interested in finance. India's debt to GDP is only 135%. Our debt to GDP is only 135%. Ladies and gentlemen, it is 282% for China, 160% for Brazil, 154% for South Africa, and 269% for the United States. What that means is we need less leverage to deliver a unit of GDP. We don't need as much borrowing. We don't need as much debt as the Chinese and the Americans do to generate a unit of GDP. So this tells you that here in India, we are able to generate relatively rapid GDP growth. We are growing faster than China and America, but we use less natural resources, less carbon, and less debt. This is good for India. If we can grow fast by using less, this is our frugal development model. This is why it's a sustainable development model that is very much something that around the world everybody envies us for. So ladies and gentlemen, the question of course is, if we are able to grow faster with less and we have a frugal model, how do we in India do it? What is it about our economy? What is it about us as a people that we can grow like this? The answer, ladies and gentlemen, is that the quest to deliver affordable products and services for a vast young population drives our development model. India is an open market driven economy. We have a competitive and specialized manufacturing sector, a vast non-tradable services sector, and an employment-intensive but relatively small agricultural sector. We produce a wide range of inexpensive items designed for aspiring middle-class consumers. Our telephone rates are the lowest in the world. Our financial services are the cheapest in the world. Ice creams, shampoos, motorcycles, small cars, heart operations, ultrasound machines, consumer appliances, all of these are very, very affordable compared to the prices around the world. These products and services are intelligently designed by world-class firms to fit the needs of Indian consumers without sacrificing reliability or necessary functionality. India has some of the cheapest products and services of the world. And how do we do this? Well, we have a well-developed innovation ecosystem. This encompasses research labs, incubators, entrepreneurs, flourishing venture capital firms, supportive regulators, and this has led to a steady stream of new industries, telecom, financial services, IT and BPO, now aviation. Take e-commerce for example. Amazon, Flipkart and Snapdeal have developed an innovative marketplace-oriented business model that is based on cash on delivery rather than upfront credit payments. This is the kind of innovation that we have in India right now. These e-commerce giants have brought hundreds of thousands of small producers and merchants online by providing inventory management, logistics, payment and financing services. Today, a sari produced in Surat by an artisan producer can swiftly find its way, probably through Guwahati, through to a buyer in Arunachal Pradesh in far northeastern India, just through these e-commerce fulfillment platforms. Similarly, payment banks are transforming the financial landscape by providing low-cost convenient bank accounts that are accessible from the Kirana store and in every post office. In an exciting boost to the green economy, Indian entrepreneurs are working on developing electric motorcycles and scooters that could lead to a mass migration away from fossil fuel driven transportation. And also importantly, ladies and gentlemen, our entrepreneurs are starting to make a huge difference in the lives of people at the base of the economic pyramid. We have a lot of poor people in India that live at less than $1.25 a day, which is the level that is used globally to denote extreme poverty. And these poor people require lighting solutions, fuel for cooking, affordable and accessible healthcare, clean water, elementary education, and financial services. In the past, government programs to supply these needs have generally not been effective and have struggled to provide quality services in these poor areas. But now, India's entrepreneurs in financial services, in healthcare, and in energy are coming up with solutions that meet the needs of the people at the base of the pyramid. Bandhan Bank, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with, Bandhan Bank, Narayan Hridayalaya, D-Light, which makes solar lanterns, are examples of companies in these sectors that have solved the problems of the poor, and as a result, these companies are now scaling up massively and providing services to the poor. Thus, it's India's innovators and entrepreneurs, ladies and gentlemen, that are really building this frugal and innovative economy that works not just for the people at the top and the middle of the income pyramid, but also at the base of the economic pyramid. And therefore, just like the United States, ladies and gentlemen, is the entrepreneurial engine for the most affluent 1 billion people on the planet, India now has the opportunity to become the entrepreneurial engine for the next 6 billion people on the planet. This is the next world, and we are going to be leaders in serving this next world. When I speak to business people, which I do often, ladies and gentlemen, I explain to them that India's design point is not the design point of Piccadilly Circus in London. It's not the design point of Times Square in New York. It's not the design point of Union Square in San Francisco. It is the design point of my very own Jhanda Chowk in Hazaribagh. और मैं सब लोगों को समझाता हूँ कि अगर आप ऐसे कुछ बनाएं जो हजारीबाग के झंडा चौक में उसे आसानी से आप बेच सकें और सब लोग उसे खरीदें, तब आप हिंदुस्तान के डिज़ाइन पॉइंट को आप अपना लेते हैं और हिंदुस्तान के डिज़ाइन पॉइंट को आप जीत सकते हैं. The meaning is that we have to deliver. If you want to be innovative and entrepreneurial in India, you have to deliver 80% of the functionality of America, 80% of the functionality at 20% of the price. That is the India design point. That is the innovation and entrepreneurial energy that is required in India. If that is what we want our innovators and entrepreneurs to do, so that they can keep on powering India's frugal and sustainable development model, then, ladies and gentlemen, the question for us in government becomes, what do we do to support this? Now I come to my final theme in terms of what we as a government are aspiring to do. Both the Honorable Prime Minister and the Honorable Finance Minister have stated over and over again that we are a pro-poor government. हमारी सरकार जो है गरीबों की सरकार है और गरीबों को समर्पित सरकार है. India's poor have the first right to the government's resources, and all our efforts must be oriented around eliminating poverty in India. This is not, ladies and gentlemen, a political statement. This is our moral responsibility. ये हमारा धर्म है, हमारा कर्तव्य है कि गरीबी को हम लोग पूरी तरीके से मिटा दें इस देश से. And now, because we are a pro-poor government, we are also a pro-markets government. We want to ensure that our markets develop well, and that's why we follow pro-competitive policies. And that's why we want our companies to become world leaders. If you look at aviation and you look at companies like Indigo and SpiceJet and Air India and Jet Air, you will find that their costs are among the lowest in the world. They are providing air services in a safe and secure way at among the lowest prices in the world. Only if our markets flourish, only if our entrepreneurs build great companies, only if we create millions of jobs for our young people, and only if we generate sufficient tax revenues and economic surplus, will we be able to serve our poor and eliminate the curse of poverty and deprivation from our country. As we follow our pro-poor, pro-market policies, we have to move the Indian state away from being a Nehruvian Sarkar to being a Kautilyan Sarkar. The Nehruvian or My Baap Sarkar has been the ruling ideology for most of independent India. In fact, it is deeply rooted in India's long history of Rajas, Maharajas, Nawabs and Sultans. It is associated with feudal dynastic rule. But we must challenge this orthodoxy because the Nehruvian Sarkar is neither serving the citizen nor the state well. The Nehruvian Sarkar during the time of the Congress and through socialist rule in India has failed us. We must find a way out of the mess created by the socialist populist Nehruvian Sarkar. We must foster India's entrepreneurial economy while lessening the heavy hand of the Nehruvian Sarkar. We have to move to a Kautilyan Sarkar. To give you an analogy of cricket, the government has to get off the playing field and let the citizens be the players. We cannot have the state be the empire and also play the game while citizens watch from the sidelines. The role of the state has to be defined as establishing and enforcing the rules and letting citizens be the players on the field. We must have minimum government, maximum governance. Our state has to be policy driven, non-discriminatory and rule-based. Thus, what is the role of the state? The role of the state is to ensure the rule of law, property and tenancy rights, financial inclusion in every village, slum and mohalla. And if you look at our government is doing that. We are strengthening the police, we are strengthening the rule of law, we are strengthening our regulatory bodies so that they are independent. We have strengthened RBI, SEBI, TRAI, we've created the new real estate regulator, we've strengthened NHAI, and we are building the necessary public infrastructure through investment and land acquisition. Our government has massively stepped up investments in roads, highways, bridges, railways, airports, and digital connectivity. This type of a Kautilyan Sarkar also plays a subtle but vital role in market development. Such market development is crucial to enable our entrepreneurial economy to flourish. Markets only develop when important public goods such as infrastructure and rules and standards and protocols are provided. We need coordinated action between the state and private companies to build market infrastructure and to help entire industries get off the ground. And our government is doing that with Aadhaar. Aadhaar is one of the most important universal public goods that enables an individual to have a secure identity and then to get that identity from the government. We are doing that through all of the standards that we have developed for digital payments through BHIM and UPI and so on. We've done that with UDAN, which has been the regional connectivity scheme that's been incredibly successful because we've unleashed market forces. And we are now going to be doing that with electric vehicles. So our government is playing the role of a facilitator. And so before the cricket begins, before the players get on the field, the Kautilyan Sarkar has much to do. The ground has to be green. There has to be comfortable seating and facilities for spectators. The rules of the game have to be defined and explained. The pitch has to be prepared. The scoreboard has to be set up. And finally, the two empires in their white coats, armed with light meters, and with the help of the third empire back in the pavilion, walk onto the field. Only when all of this is done, only when the pitch is prepared, the rules are set, the spectators are comfortable in the stands, that's when the play can begin. We have to provide the infrastructure and then the cricket can begin. When the players come on, they'll score delightful centuries, astonish us with their athletic catching, bewilder the batsmen with their penetrating bowling. But it is the empires, the groundsmen and the cleaning crews that make it all possible. It is the state that makes it possible, and that is what a modern day efficient state does. It supports entrepreneurs and innovators. Ladies and gentlemen, being such a Sarkar, a Kautilyan Sarkar, not a Nehruvian Sarkar, takes a lot of work. Maybe even more work than the Nehruvian Sarkar. Citizens are treated with dignity. Every person is important. Not that there are some VIPs with red lights on their car. Every person is important, as Honorable Prime Minister said. Corruption, one of the central themes of our government, corruption is reduced. The fiscal situation improves. Tax collection go up. because markets are allowed to flourish. The state is lean, limited, and focused on what the state must do. This is the rightful role of the state, and this is how we build a great nation. Ladies and gentlemen, I will conclude now. India's economic destiny is to provide frugal products and services to the next 6 billion people on the planet. This is the next world we must aspire to lead. We are already one of the world's leading producers of IT services, generic pharmaceuticals, small cars, and motorcycles. We make more motorcycles than any other country in the world by a wide margin. We will soon become a manufacturing hub for electronics. The number of mobile phones made in India is increasing rapidly every day through the great work that Shri Ravi Shankar Prasad ji has done. As we export our frugal and innovative industries across the developing world, we are likely to spur growth and development for other countries in the developing world as well. Such economic growth is consumption-driven and demand-led. India also offers a template for redefining the role of the state. We will run a rules-based, technology-driven state that enables markets to flourish through well-regulated competition. And thus, India is poised to provide fresh impetus to global growth. India's economic growth will be significant in terms of its absolute contribution to global economic activity. But India's economic development model is also uniquely innovative, frugal, and green. As other developing countries begin to follow India's frugal model, it could potentially drive much more sustainable and equitable growth with social justice for the entire planet. And that's how, ladies and gentlemen, we will shape the new world order. So here in Guwahati, you can be pioneers in driving this exciting transformation of India. You're working on innovative projects and government programs. I was just with Honorable Chief Minister Saab earlier today, and he was telling me about a program to supply tractors to villages on a rental basis. It's a very exciting program. I took notes as he was writing it down, thinking how could we replicate something like that in Jharkhand. You're working on very innovative government programs. You're inventing brilliant new solutions to our challenging problems of poverty, disease, and climate change. Perhaps, and I hope, that some young entrepreneur in Guwahati will create the next Indigo, the next Google, and perhaps even the next Apple. So please go forth and transform Assam, the Northeast, and thus India. And with your innovation and your energy, you will also surely transform the world. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.